7. Lawrence Spencer receives a strange package. A heavy envelope stuffed with documents from a military archive dating back to the 1940s ends up in his mailbox. At first glance, these are ordinary papers. Duty rosters, internal reports, memos. However, some of the documents are marked top secret. All of them are connected to the U.S. Army Air Base in Roswell. Among the materials are transcripts of unusual interrogations. They concern contact with an unknown being, with whom the military was unable to establish communication for a long time. Specialists from a wide range of fields were brought in, from linguists to cryptographers, but all attempts proved unsuccessful. It gradually becomes clear that conventional methods of communication do not work here. The being did not speak and did not respond to speech. Information was transmitted directly at the level of consciousness, as if thoughts appeared in one's mind on their own. These records contain strange information, descriptions of technologies that go beyond conventional science, warnings about future events, and hints at a hidden confrontation that humanity is not even aware of. At first, all of this appears to be scattered fragments devoid of meaning, but then one detail emerges that changes everything. And if you think this is just another conspiracy theory, you're mistaken. Watch this video until the end, because what comes next will astonish you. Matilda O'Donnell. McElroy, a military nurse in the U.S. Army, was one of the few who knew what really happened. For many years, she kept information secret that could have cost her life if revealed. Decades later, she is diagnosed with a serious illness. Realizing that she has very little time left, she decides to pass on the materials she has gathered. Matilda sends the documents to Lawrence Spencer. This choice is not accidental. Earlier, she had come across his book, The Oz Factors, dedicated to unexplained phenomena, and concluded that he would be able to approach this information without bias. The package also contained a handwritten letter. In it, she confesses that she has kept this secret for 60 years, and now, at the age of 84, she can no longer remain silent. The story she told begins on July 8, 1947. At that time, Matilda was working as a flight nurse and served in the Women's Air Force in Roswell. The morning began as usual, but almost immediately it became clear that something had happened on the base. There were unfamiliar people walking around the grounds. Some were in military uniform, others in civilian clothes. Everyone looked tense. Armed guards were stationed everywhere. There were clearly more of them than usual. What had happened in those hours? Matilda was heading to the hospital, but on the way, she was stopped by 2 military police officers. They politely asked her to come with them, but their tone made it clear that it wasn't really a request. They led her to a hangar, where a high-ranking officer was already waiting at the entrance. The colonel briefly explained the situation. An unidentified flying object had crashed in the desert. A survivor was found at the site. None of the known methods of communication worked. Matilda's task was to determine whether the being required medical assistance. Even then, she was alarmed by the fact that the colonel immediately made it clear that the being they had found was not human. But what exactly had they found in the desert? She got her answer when she entered a darkened room at the back of the hangar. There in the corner, sitting on a small chair, was a being about a meter tall. It had gray skin, a disproportionately large head, and no hair. Each hand had 3 fingers. It had no nose, no mouth, and no ears. The body did not look alive in the usual sense of the word. It looked more like an artificially created shell. No internal organs were visible. The military viewed this being as a problem that needed to be solved. Matilda, on the other hand, saw it as a patient. She calmly approached, trying not to make any sudden movements, and sat down next to it. There were no visible injuries nor any signs of pain. The creature behaved calmly. Matilda leaned in to say something, but didn't have time to utter a word. At that moment, a thought appeared in her mind, as if someone had placed it directly into her consciousness. The creature made it clear that it was not injured. It explained that it was using this body as a shell, which was unlike a human one. It did not need food or air in the usual sense, but it did need water. Matilda expected to be frightened, but instead she felt a strange sense of calm. The thoughts she perceived did not seem hostile. On the contrary, she had the feeling that the being before her was female in type and posed no danger. Contact was established. Matilda tried to respond in the same way, mentally, and immediately received a reply. The being called itself Aral and explained that only Matilda was able to communicate with it. For some reason, the other people nearby remained closed off to it. For some reason, the other people nearby remained closed off to it. Their contact lasted for 6 weeks. During all this time, the conversations were recorded, documented, and analyzed. As a result, hundreds of pages of transcripts were produced. Aral spoke about things that went far beyond human understanding. She talked about a war that has lasted thousands of years and about conflicts that span not just one galaxy, but vast regions of space. If all this is true, it turns out that humans are not at all who they are used to thinking they are. And perhaps humanity does not understand its true nature at all. Aral claimed to be an officer of the so-called Domain. This is a civilization that controls a colossal part of the physical universe. According to Aral, the Domain has existed for so long that it is hard to even imagine. Its history spans trillions of years. During this time, this civilization spread its influence across thousands of galaxies, controlling planets, moons, and asteroids. And all of this is just a small part of a much larger system. Long before them, there was another structure called the Old Empire. It was the one that previously controlled this sector of space. And while the Domain operated through exploration and expansion, the methods of the Old Empire were much harsher. Forceful suppression, nuclear technologies, electronic influence, and mind control on the scale of entire planets. A war broke out between these two powers, lasting thousands of years. In the end, the Domain emerged victorious. However, after the fall of the Old Empire, its bases, automated systems, and technological complexes remained scattered throughout the universe. Many of them ceased to operate, but some continued to function autonomously. One of these systems, according to Aral, was located right here within our solar system. Aral's mission was directly connected to studying this system. However, during the mission, her ship was struck by a powerful electrical discharge, resulting in the loss of navigation. At the same time, Aral herself was not harmed. The explanation she gave was completely beyond the bounds of ordinary perception. She described herself as an immortal spiritual being, existing in the form of pure consciousness. According to her, such entities are not bound to a body. They are able to move, perceive, and act beyond the limitations of space, using a physical shell only as a temporary tool. This means that the body is merely a vessel. It can be used to accomplish a task and then left behind. Aral claimed that this is not unique to members of her kind. Humans are not just biological beings. According to Aral, at their core, humans are a form of consciousness that originally could exist outside the body, move freely, and retain memories of many lifetimes. And if that's the case, then why did everything change? Aral's answer sounded alarming. Earth is not just a planet, it's an isolated system, essentially a prison. After arriving on Earth, all of humans' abilities became blocked. Similar ideas are found not only in this story. In different cultures, religions, and theories, the same idea appears again and again, as if human abilities are being deliberately limited by someone or something. The prison system was created by the Old Empire around the 8th millennium BC. Those considered a threat were sent here: dissenters, creators, people with unconventional perceptions. They were called the Untouchables. Billions of such entities were isolated on a remote planet, confined in vulnerable biological bodies subject to aging and decay. But the most important element of the system is not the body. The key mechanism is activated after death. According to Aral, there is a kind of protective barrier around the solar system. It captures the moment of death and intercepts the consciousness, preventing it from leaving the boundaries of the system. After that, the consciousness is transferred to so-called processing stations. There, the process of complete memory cleansing is initiated. Not only the most recent life is erased, every bit of accumulated experience is wiped out. Then the next stage begins: programming. Images familiar to many from near-death experiences are implanted into the consciousness. The light at the end of the tunnel, figures of deceased relatives, and certain guides. All of this is a preset scenario. Next, new attitudes, beliefs, myths, and moral constructs are formed, all aimed at controlling behavior and perception. After the cycle is completed, the consciousness is sent back to Earth in a new body. Birth, life, death, and the cycle repeats. In this model, religions, conflicts, and social structures become part of the overall mechanism. Even aging itself, according to Errol, is not accidental. It is an element of limitation. Despite the fact that the domain is said to have defeated the old empire thousands of years ago, this system continues to operate autonomously. And yet, there is a way to go beyond its boundaries. It is not connected to technology or physical escape. It all comes down to memory. To get out, a person must remember who they were before they ended up here. Errol claimed that our usual understanding of the origin of life on Earth has nothing to do with reality. According to her, the planet's biosphere did not develop naturally. Everything living here is the result of external intervention. Behind this was a vast system in which different forms of life did not arise on their own, but were created, manufactured, and then settled on Earth by structures resembling giant space corporations. Some structures were responsible for plants and insects, while others dealt with more complex organisms, including animals. Each form of life was created for a specific purpose. Even the mechanism of reproduction was not introduced by chance. Sexual reproduction allowed the system to exist autonomously, reducing the need for external intervention. Life began to reproduce itself. If you're interested in what happens next, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. The most radical part of this story concerned humans. The outstanding minds of humanity are not random geniuses. According to Errol, some people still have partial access to knowledge that was lost long ago. Therefore, their ideas and discoveries were not simply the result of talent, but rather a return to something that had already existed. Leonardo, Tesla, Mozart. What if they weren't inventing, but remembering? Errol also spoke about those who had previously tried to stop this system. The domain once sent thousands of its officers, pilots, engineers, and specialists to Earth to figure out how this prison works and to shut it down. But the operation failed. They were captured, had their memories erased, and were integrated into human society. They were called the Lost Battalion. Over time, through endless cycles of reincarnation, their energy dissipated. They forgot who they were. It became impossible to find them. But then something happened that changed the situation. After contact with Arl, Matilda began to remember things she couldn't possibly have known. She saw images of unknown technologies and understood principles that no one had ever taught her. For the first time in thousands of years, one of the members of the Lost Battalion began to realize their true nature. And that person turned out to be Matilda herself. Her behavior had seemed unusual from the very beginning. She wasn't afraid and didn't back down. On the contrary, she remained calm and seemed to intuitively understand that what stood before her was not an enemy. But along with this, the danger was also growing. The military recorded Matilda's every word, but the process of communication itself remained inaccessible to them. They only heard the spoken part. The main exchange of information took place beyond their control. As long as the military trusted Matilda, contact with Arl continued. But at some point, the military decided they no longer needed an intermediary. On August 12th, they were separated. After that, they tried to force Arl to communicate directly, without telepathy. Matilda was removed, and she could only observe everything happening through a glass partition. Equipment was connected to Arl, and they began to administer electric impulses, gradually increasing the voltage. The military were convinced they could achieve results by force. However, what they had before them was not a new tool, but a long-known technology. This was exactly how the old empire used to erase the memories of its prisoners. And if that was really the case, then at that moment they were simply activating the same mechanism of consciousness destruction. There was no reaction, no resistance, no pain, no fear. Consciousness vanished, leaving only an empty shell before them. Attempts to bring her back yielded no results. After that, all materials obtained during the contact were classified. Matilda was required to sign non-disclosure documents. Every single attempt to tell the truth was viewed as an act of treason. With all the severe and inevitable consequences, she signed her name. Life went on. Matilda returned to her ordinary existence. After that, contact with those beings still occurred, but rarely and only for short periods. These brief episodes still turned out to be important, because it was through them that Matilda began to recover her lost memories. But there was almost no time left. She was aging, her body was growing weaker, and Matilda understood that soon everything would start over again. The cycle would close, her memory would be erased once more, and everything she had managed to remember would disappear. In 2007, she takes the final step, namely, she sends the documents to Lawrence Spencer. In the accompanying letter, she says that after her death, her consciousness will once again go through the cleansing procedure and end up in a new body without any memory. The only chance to preserve the information is to publish it. A year later, the book Interview with an Alien is published. The story instantly attracts attention. It is called one of the strangest and most discussed cases of contact with extraterrestrial civilizations. But Matilda is no longer here. If we are to believe the version presented, she once again went through the cycle of cleansing, programming, and returning to Earth. This means that somewhere right now, there is a person living who has no idea who they once were. Perhaps it's just an ordinary teenage girl. She lives an ordinary life, studies, socializes, makes plans, and sometimes feels that something is not quite right with this world. The book evokes a strong response. Many claim that they read it not as a work of fiction, but as memories. There is a desire to find Matilda, to determine who she has become, but along with the interest, questions also arise. Upon closer analysis, inconsistencies are discovered. The text uses terms that do not correspond to the era. The date format differs from that used in American military documents. There are mentions of people who, at the time of the events described, were not yet known. Explains this as editorial revision, claiming that the essence remains unchanged. However, researchers go further. A comparison shows that many of the ideas had already appeared before and in similar wording. Gradually, a different version emerges. The story may not have been a revelation, but rather a reworking of already existing concepts. Spencer himself insists otherwise. He claims that Matilda is a real person with whom he had a personal conversation shortly before her death. But it is impossible to verify this. The original documents have been destroyed. According to him, this was done deliberately to avoid pressure and persecution. As a result, only the text remains. The witness has disappeared. The evidence has disappeared. Notably, Spencer himself mentions a source in his acknowledgments that immediately raises questions. He relied on materials from Wikipedia, specifically the article about Roswell. Given the scale of these claims, this looks at the very least strange. To this, another important fact is added. In the early 2000s, Spencer wrote that he had been involved with Scientology for many years. This is a teaching which states that a person is not actually a body, but a consciousness that lives many times and can lose memories of past lives. This directly explains the origin of key ideas such as the immortality of consciousness, memory loss, recurring lives, and the possibility of controlling a person. If you put it all together, it becomes clear. The story is not unique, but reworked from already existing ideas. But it's also impossible to write everything off as pure fiction. Similar stories keep appearing again and again. In some cases, people talk about restricted places where fragments of unknown devices might be stored and secret research is conducted. In other cases, people tell stories about strange objects in the sky that have been observed for many years and still have no clear explanation. And this is where things get really interesting, because on our channel, there are already at least 2 videos that express very similar ideas. One video talks about the Anunnaki, whom some researchers call the creators of humanity. The second video is about the Nephilim and the Book of Enoch. That video also discusses intervention from outside. If you look at all of this together, it might seem that we are not dealing with 3 different stories, but with the same idea that keeps appearing in a new form each time. That's why, after watching this episode, be sure to check out those 2 videos as well. Then the overall picture will become much clearer, and many details that now seem strange may start to be perceived quite differently. What do you think about all of this? Write your thoughts in the comments. In 2007, Lawrence Spencer receives a strange